Please welcome Penny Lane.
Thank you. Thanks for still being here at the end of all that.
Do you want to? I know there's, you got.
It's like I was thinking about this when I was watching like half this room helped with this film in one way or another, and if I started, it would like literally be the whole Q&A. So please, all of you, accept my sincere thanks. Like I feel so grateful to be here with you guys tonight. I feel grateful to those of you who came to see the movie when you could be doing so many other things with your life right now, but also just like so many people in this room did so many things to make this film possible and make it as good as it is. It was very hard to craft the story. It was hard to understand the character, and her motivations were very mysterious to me. And so I really had to rely on my team, and I really tried to show that in the film. I tried to honor them because it looks like my most personal film, but in fact, it's my most collaborative film. Like, I could never have done this without the people who came along with me.
Awesome. Yeah, beautiful. Okay, so I came prepared, made some notes. I just have a few questions.
We also coordinated the jackets, in case you were wondering.
So I wanted to start with Abigail Marsh. She's the Georgetown professor, and the element of her helping you understand how some people are, more empathetic, but how does that translate into actual Good Samaritan behavior, which is the mystery. Now that you are on the other side, do you see something different in people? Do you see, anti-psychopaths walking among us?
Definitely. I mean, I think that the amygdala aspect is almost a little bit like a red herring. It's kind of like, I left it in, just me being like, oh, okay, like, whatever. Like, that doesn't mean anything. Like, so I think what it really brought me to my engagement with Abby, and she's become like actually a really good friend of mine, is just the understanding of like the deep variability of our internal experiences. And, empathy is based on me mapping my experience onto yours, and that, works pretty well, like as a rule, right? But this project really made me confront just the incredible differences that we have inside of us, and like our moral calculations and our baseline beliefs, and like where they come from, and how we see the world and how we think about things. And I think that I started the project much more narrow in my way of thinking about morality. And it was really through like all these difficult conversations and the whole process that I started to understand that my way of thinking about morality is not universal, and it shouldn't be. Like, thank God, like it's great that people are different, and it's a good thing that some people feel like they wouldn't give a kitty to a stranger because they would never in a million years subject their kid to the even the 1 in a million chance that they might die in surgery. And even though I don't get that and they don't get me, I'm pleased that we have that kind of variability. I think that's good. And there aren't that many psychopaths.
I think so. The part of the film where that question got really big for me is when you say, is this how culture can be different or evolves? And that was actually the moment where I connected it to your other films and your other work. When did how did that sort of form the frame of the film, or did it, or is that just me like picking that part out?
No, I'm glad you brought that up, because it's also like I kind of like I kept explaining to my team that the reason that that's there is that I see it as like kind of a little bit of an unhinged rant. Like, that's what I call the scene, like the unhinged rant. Now, in the moment, I meant everything I said, and I still sort of believe those things, but I look back on it, and I just think it's too narrow. It's too narrow a way of thinking about what moral progress might be. And I also just kind of don't know if I believe in moral progress in the same way that I did a few years ago, having really thought about it a lot. And that's kind of part of the whole messy middle of the film, is showing that, like, scientific advances come with costs. I showed you a lot of dogs. I could have shown you a lot more dogs that, suffered and died to make this miraculous miracle exist. It's not to say like that wasn't worth it or that was worth it. Like, that's actually a question. And like, that's a question we're gonna keep asking with the pigs. I tried to like drop that in a little bit, even though it's not the topic of the film. it's these questions, these moral questions aren't going away. We're not solving them. So I think I was sort of thinking about, this very narrow band of moral progress that has to do with like how wide you consider your circle of concern, right? From like close person to distant stranger. And like, do I think the whole world should be like me? No, I don't think that way anymore. I just don't. It's much less satisfying. It was very hard to craft the arc of the film because the arc goes from like a person who's quite certain, like almost abrasively so, to like kind of just losing all of that and then being like, the end. And then the other difficulty with the arc is that like if you did the story of the recipient, you'd have a pretty good arc, right? Because you'd have someone who like needs something and gets it, and like it's like an upward journey, and I was like fine before, and now like I'm a little worse off. Like it's just kind of a weird narrative arc. Yeah. So the philosophical questions and the scientific questions for me became like the way of structuring it, like engaging with these questions, like in the order that they're engaged with was, for me, the arc that I created.
Got it. That's awesome. So the work of Sally Sattel, she's the author and advocate who kind of sort of breaks away from that arc about altruistic donors and says, altruism is not enough. I was kind of curious, I really respected that you gave so much time to her in the film, but is the work that she's doing, is there any extension to that you weren't able to explore? Like, is she, trying to get legislation passed or overturned or?
Yeah. I mean, the biggest problem with the project was that it was such an octopus, and the topic was so big, and it could have done a whole film about transplant policy. Like, it's so complicated and there's so much to discuss. Could have done a whole film about like the technological aspect of the surgeries and that history. So there was just way too much, and I had to just do like, here's like a smorgasbord of topics, Google, if you will, which ones you think you want to know more about later, And so the policy aspect I thought was super important because it is important to acknowledge that, again, like my kind of naivete going into this was like, if we just had more people doing altruistic donation, there wouldn't be a problem. We'd solve the problem, the end, and it's like probably not gonna happen. And so if it's not gonna happen, then like, what's the point of like having that belief? Is there a better solution? And I do think, there's a scene in the film that I cut out because it tested poorly with audiences. And it was a scene in which I explained just how much money I lost for doing this. Like, it was really quite an expensive gift that I gave, and it wasn't, I didn't get it until I was doing it, because when I first had the idea, this is the scene that I cut. When I first had the idea, I was a tenured college professor, and I had like a salary, and I had time off every year. And I thought, well, I'll do this during winter break or summer, and makes no impact on my finances at all. Paychecks still come. But then I quit that job and became a freelance filmmaker. And then I was like, oh shit, like, that means I can't take, like, this surgery now means I can't take particular jobs because I'm not sure when the surgery is gonna be, and I don't know how long I'm gonna be out after. And so I actually had to pass on work. And then the surgery kept getting pushed back because of reasons. And then it just meant that I like truly like didn't take work for kind of a long time. And I had no like sick leave or anything like that I could tap into. And I wasn't providing for my coworker. Like, I wasn't like contributing to the company. So, and then I had to pay for someone to stay in an Airbnb to come take care of me. And it just like genuinely was very expensive. So, and it doesn't matter, but it's just kind of to point out that like, this is actually a sacrifice. Like, it really truly is. It's not as hard as people think it is. I think on average, people think it's much harder and more difficult than it is. And I tried to make that clear in the film, even though I freaked out. It was mostly just me. It's like, fine, it's not that big of a deal. But it is a sacrifice. And I think to get back to Sally, what Sally is saying is this is a sacrifice. We should acknowledge it. Why have we carved this area out and said like, unlike, I don't know, sperm or eggs or hair or, other aspects of our bodies that we are kind of allowed to make a wider range of choices with. Why have we carved this out? And the answer is that there was this guy named Barry Jacobs who people didn't like, who showed up in Congress in 1984, and he just made the whole idea of compensation look disgusting and abhorrent, and people thought he was gross, and Al Gore won that argument. That's why we have that policy. It's that arbitrary. And once you get that policy in place, it's very hard to change. So do I think that donors should be compensated? Not exactly. I think donors should be reimbursed for the lost money that they do, because it is a really difficult thing to do. And we would get a lot more donors if you didn't, and again, the issue of class is major because I had savings, like I was able to withstand that financial loss, but not everyone is. So we could go on and on about this, but I won't. So it's really not my area of expertise anyway, but it's an interesting, important subject.
Totally. Okay. Anyone with a question here? Yeah, right here.
Thank you. And I think it's just important to say, there's a big gulf between, let's have a market for organs, which is no one is proposing. And, let's maybe compensate these fucking heroes for their, lost wages. There's a really big difference between those two things, but I think people tend to put this as if it's the same thing. Yeah, and so absolutely, there are organizations and laws that are, happening all the time, all of which are valuable to support donors.
Thank you for that. Yeah, let's go with you. Hey, well, this is cool.
Oh, okay. I hate microphones. So you set out to do a really good thing, but the part that made me emotional and touched me the most is that you felt like you didn't have that person that was going to do that good thing for you and be your healthcare proxy and be part of your will. I'm curious how you feel reflecting on that now, and if you feel like after donating a kidney, if more people want to do good things for you.
Yeah, that's such a good question. Thank you. And it is a really subtle but constant part of the film, this ideas of isolation, connection, And so I do think that the making the film was very healing, actually, for me. Having my crew with me in the hospital is cool. It was a really amazing experience to meet these people and make good friends with, Dr. Melanson and Sally Seitel and, meet all these other donors. And, there's so much of a fixation, understandably, on the concept of, the hug between the donor and the recipient. It's, such a clean image of that connection that I was seeking in a way, even though I was denying myself. It's, very weird stuff. I'm back in therapy, by the way. But, there is a way that you, avoid the thing you need the most. That's a real thing. I forget what it's called, but I learned about it in therapy last week. And I do think that was at play, and I tried to show it. I was very conflicted. I wanted a hero's welcome, but if I got one, I was embarrassed. I didn't want people to think I was weird, but also I did. I wanted the attention or the acknowledgement. It was a lot of conflicting feelings. So I do think it's the kind of experience that makes you look at your life. And for better or worse, I was very deep in a process of self-reflection and acknowledging. And this is something that's very subtle in the film, too. There's a part toward the end where I talk about loving the hospital and how I, loved being this needy baby. That was very intentionally put there because I think that's, really hard to acknowledge that we're all needy babies at the core. And so even when you think about the parable of the Good Samaritan, anyone could be anyone in that story. We're all the people in that story. We're all the people who walk by and don't help. We're the person in need of help, and we're the person who stops to help. All of us are all of those figures. And I think that, a lot of the judgment I put on myself was that I wasn't a good enough, I wasn't always selfless. And that's not really a thing that anyone is, unless they're actually a saint, which is maybe not a real thing. I don't know.
Over there. Yeah, you.
So I think people meet their emotional needs in various diverse ways, and that's a good thing. And I tried to acknowledge that in the film as well, my urge to kind of give of myself. I didn't choose childbirth, for example, which is I think a thing that I could have chosen, and no one would have asked me why I was doing it, by the way, and no one would have been but why? But really, why? What if you give birth to a psychopath? No one does that to you when you're giving birth, but if you give a kidney, people are but what if it's a murderer? You gotta be kidding me. It's so weird. So to me, I met those emotional needs in a different way. It was it was making the film, it was throwing myself in the care of my community, it was understanding all the people that love me, and it doesn't look as conventional as maybe what some other people might have chosen. And the recipient piece, I just wanted to spare this. There's this idea in transplant of it's a concept in medical ethics called the tyranny of the gift. And there are some gifts that are so big, they're incommensurate. You can never thank someone enough for like saving your life. Like that's like impossible. Like what do you get that person for Christmas? And I think I was trying to not put someone in that position. Later I thought, well, I shouldn't assume that's how the recipient would feel. Maybe they would want to meet me and that would be meaningful. So I made it clear that from my side I was open. But it's at this point not my decision. It's been many years and I haven't heard from the recipient. I don't think I'm going to. Someone could probably figure it out if you could just like, break into some medical records. But I feel fine with it. I wanted this to be a gift and I wanted it to be free and not come with attachments or obligations. That was the reason, as much as I joked about like not wanting a complicated relationship in my life, like it really was about like not burdening anyone. Yeah, gifts come with obligations.
Thank you for that. I'm gonna see if there's anyone over on this side. No?
We're like blinded.
Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry. Was there someone here?
I took your job. Sorry.
What? Oh, there we go. Okay. I only have one job, Penny.
I'm like,
I get to pick the person. Okay, I pick you.
yeah.
All right. Okay, let's.
Thank you, and thank you for sharing that. And it's okay to cry. I cry every time I watch the movie too. I will briefly acknowledge part of what you said, just for people in the room who don't know, because it didn't make it into the film. There's something amazing called chain donation or domino donation that, again, look it up later. It's very interesting. It basically has to do with the idea that like one person's altruistic donation can kick off a chain and like really unlock a lot of other donations and make it possible to save a lot more lives. And it's very motivating to a lot of donors. I think I might have been part of a chain. It was like unclear to me, so I don't want to claim that I was because I never actually found out what was going on. But I think I might have been.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
And I didn't know, and it's, you think the story is going to be like I met someone on dialysis and, understood their pain and like felt that, and then that's, and it hasn't been the case in most of my research that that's the story of an altruistic donor. It's quite often in this more abstract space that I was in, where I heard about it. Like I didn't know anyone in that situation. I heard about what dialysis was like. I heard about the need. I heard about the risks and benefits, and it just seemed like an obviously good idea, as I said many times in the film. And so, but it's interesting because we have this story of altruism that it has to start with empathy. And I think I became more empathetic from doing the altruistic act, because then I was able to access my empathetic response to what that experience was, because I felt that I was trying to help. Does that make sense? So like it was reverse of the story. Like I think I'm more empathetic now than before.
All right, I think we have time for one more question. I'm getting the sign over here. Where? You, whoever said that, you get it. I literally cannot see a thing up here. Go. Oh.
So it's a great question. What advice would I give to someone who's considering altruistic donation that I wish I had known? I mean, there are things I knew I just didn't quite take in. Here's the basic one. You should donate at a center that's part of a network called the National Kidney Registry. Some people here from the National Kidney Registry, they'll be happy to talk to you about it. There are a lot of people who are doing a lot to organize and protect and look out for the needs of donors. For way too long, as you sort of heard earlier, there wasn't enough protection for donors, and there are centers that are part of a network that will look out for you in the off chance that something goes wrong. There are also tax benefits that I didn't know existed until it was too late to get them. So I wish I'd known about that. There is a tax credit in New York, apparently, so that's cool. Didn't know that. And there are, again, nonprofits that will work with you to help reimburse your lost wages, but not if you suddenly think of that 3 months after your surgery and you're depressed and you're like angry and you wish you had thought of that earlier. So I do think there are ways to protect yourself, and I didn't think about any of them. Like, none of them. And that was really silly. So that's my advice. Look into, if you're interested in doing it, like, don't do it the way I did it and just randomly do it. Like, do some research and like ask around about what kind of protections are available, because there are some, and I didn't get any of them. Whoops.
All right. Well, Penny, thank you so much for
thanks
sharing
for being
the
here,
film.
guys.
Thanks for being with us. And congratulations. Yes.